Hey, you ever feel like you're just getting your head around something? Like you finally understand it and then suddenly, boom, it gets complicated all over again. Or maybe there's a whole other layer you didn't see coming.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I know that feeling.
That's kind of the vibe I'm getting with all this recent talk about President Trump's tariffs, especially when you look at electronics. You shared some articles, and honestly, it feels a bit like a roller coaster.
I can absolutely see why it feels that way. There's been, well, a lot of back and forth, different signals coming out, and it's not always immediately obvious how they connect or, what the real story is.
Right. So that's our mission for this deep dive. Try to untangle this, particularly these exemptions, or maybe not exemptions, for electronics. We want to figure out what was actually announced, how people reacted, Wall Street, China, and what it might mean down the road. Maybe even for us, thinking about buying new gadgets.
Exactly. And we'll lean quite a bit on that CBS News report you mentioned. It does a pretty good job laying out the initial statements and then, crucially, the clarifications that followed.
Yeah.
That seems to be where a lot of the head-scratching started.
Okay, so let's jump in. That CBS piece kicks off mentioning a pretty strong statement from President Trump on Truth Social. Said something like, no exceptions to his new tariff announcements. Sounds pretty clear-cut.
It does on the surface. But here's the thing. Just a couple of days before that Sunday post, on the Friday, actually, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, they issued an official notice.
Okay.
And that notice specifically excluded certain electronics from the new China tariffs. We're talking big categories, smartphones, computers, that kind of stuff.
Wait. So the official notice came out Friday saying these things are excluded, and then on Sunday the message was no exceptions.
That's the timeline, yeah. So you've got this apparent contradiction happening almost back to back. Makes you wonder, right? No exceptions after the exceptions were already detailed.
Totally. It's like saying everything's on sale, but the fine print excludes half the store. Why do you think that happened? The timing seems odd.
Well, it's hard to say for sure. The Friday CBP notice looks like an official policy action, right? Something decided at that level. The Sunday Post, maybe it was aiming for a broader, tougher message for, public perception without necessarily changing the CBP guidance. Or, maybe things were still being debated internally. It's murky.
Well, whatever the internal reason, Wall Street definitely seemed to run with the Friday news, the good news about the exclusions. The article says stock futures ticked up. S&P, Dow, NASDAQ.
They did. Investors clearly saw that exclusion as a positive. Tariffs mean higher costs for companies, potentially hitting profits, stock prices.
Yeah.
So taking the electronics off that list, that's generally good news for the market.
Yeah, makes sense.
And the report quotes Dan Ives. He's a tech analyst at Wedbush Securities. He said it took the, quote, doomsday scenario off the table for big tech and the chip sector.
Wow, doomsday scenario. That's strong. Shows how much anxiety there must have been.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It suggests they were really bracing for impact if those tariffs hit electronics hard.
And Apple's got to be Exhibit A there, right? The article mentions them specifically. Makes perfect sense. All those iPhones made in China, a big tariff would hit them, and
Right.
probably us, pretty directly.
Absolutely. Smartphones are such a huge consumer item. Tariffs there, you'd feel it. For Apple, with that massive China production footprint, it could have really squeezed margins or forced price hikes. So yeah, this exclusion was a big sigh of relief for them and potentially for anyone planning to buy an iPhone.
But, oh, here comes the twist. Because it's never that simple, is it? The article points out that even with this exclusion from the new tariffs, these electronics still face that 20% tariff linked to fentanyl.
Ah, yes. The plot thickens.
So it's like they dodged one bullet, but there's still another one flying.
That's a good way to put it. It's a really important distinction. The exclusion seems to apply to this potential new round of broad tariffs. But that 20% fentanyl-related tariff, that's separate, already in place. So while maybe a bigger hit was avoided, these goods aren't just sailing into the U.S. tariff-free.
Okay, so it's not zero tariff, just not the potentially much higher new one. It shows how many layers there are to this whole trade thing.
Exactly. Multiple policies, sometimes overlapping, sometimes seemingly contradictory.
Got it. So tech breathes a sigh of relief, but maybe not a full sigh. What about China? How did they react to the electronics getting a pass, at least from the new stuff?
Well, they weren't exactly throwing a party. Their commerce ministry basically called the exclusion a small step, and they doubled down on their usual position. They want all the U.S. tariffs gone, period.
So thanks, but no thanks. We want the whole thing reversed.
Pretty much. It signals that, okay, this specific move might be seen as slightly positive, but it doesn't fundamentally change their view on the overall trade dispute or the damage they feel tariffs cause.
And there was that comment from President Xi Jinping, too, wasn't there? Warning about protectionism leading nowhere and trade wars having no winner.
Right. That was him speaking in Vietnam, I believe. It's a consistent message from China, basically saying these tariff strategies are counterproductive for everyone involved in the global economy. A clear signal aimed at the U.S., underlining those ongoing tensions.
Okay, now, this is where my head started spinning again, because just when you think, okay, electronics are safe for now, the article brings up Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and he apparently suggested this whole exclusion might just be temporary.
Mm-hmm. That definitely adds another layer of, wait, what? Back into the mix.
And he specifically mentioned potential tariffs on semiconductors coming soon, like in a
Yeah.
month or two.
Yeah, that's what was reported. That statement really injects a whole lot of uncertainty right back into the picture. Because semiconductors, I mean, that's everything.
Right. They're the brains in basically all our tech.
Yeah.
So, okay, maybe the finished phone avoids the new tariff now, but if you tax the chips that go into the phone later,
Exactly. You could still end up with serious disruptions or cost increases trickling down. It's like, avoiding the tax on the finished car, but then whacking the engine with a huge tariff. It affects the final product one way or another.
and didn't the article also loop back to Trump's own posts, saying they are looking at the semiconductor industry, the whole electronic supply chain, specifically under, like, national security investigations?
Yes, that's a key piece. Framing potential future actions, especially on something as critical as semiconductors, through a national security lens, well, it provides a different kind of justification than just pure trade balance concerns.
So it could be less about economics and more about controlling critical tech.
That seems to be part of the rationale being put forward. Semiconductors are absolutely vital for tech leadership, defense, you name it. So invoking national security adds significant weight to potential actions.
Man. Okay, before we got this exemption news, the article did give that stark example of what could have happened to prices. That iPhone 16 Pro Max potentially jumping from, what, $1,200 to almost $1,900?
Yeah, based on that UBS investment research estimate. It's a huge jump. Really drives home the potential impact on regular people just wanting to buy a phone. It shows what kind of sticker shock was potentially avoided, at least for the time being.
Definitely puts it in perspective. But even with that bullet dodged, it sounds like the experts are still kind of holding their breath. That quote from Ben Reitz is at Melius Research,
Yeah.
saying things look better for Apple and Nvidia, sure, but it's not yet an all clear.
Yeah, I think that's a very sensible take.
Yeah.
You've got the possibility of semiconductor tariffs still hanging out there, plus the fentanyl tariff is still a thing.
Yeah.
So the long-term picture. Still pretty fuzzy. The immediate crisis might seem averted for electronics, but the underlying issues and potential for future actions, they haven't gone away.
It really feels like the storm clouds just parted for a second, but they could definitely gather again.
That's a good analogy.
Okay, so let's try and wrap our heads around this, it feels like. Step 1, Trump says no exceptions on tariffs. Step 2, wait, actually key electronics are excluded just before that. Step 3, tech industry breathes a sigh of relief, markets go up. Step 4, oh, but wait, there's still that other fentanyl tariff. Step 5, China says, meh, small step. Step 6, uh-oh, maybe the exclusion is temporary and semiconductor tariffs are coming soon, potentially for national security reasons. Step 7, thank goodness for the exclusion because prices could have gone way up. And step 8, experts say, hold on, not so fast, it's not over yet. Did I get the main beats?
Huh. Yeah, that's actually a fantastic summary. You nailed the roller coaster ride. It perfectly captures the twists, turns, and the lingering uncertainty. It really does show how complex and, frankly, sometimes confusing these trade dynamics can be.
Yeah. So, for everyone listening, maybe on your commute or whatever, what's the bottom line for you? Well, the good news is you probably won't see a sudden massive price hike on that phone or laptop you were looking at least not from these specific new tariffs. But, and it's a big but, the whole situation is still tense. And if those semiconductor tariffs do happen down the line, that could definitely still affect prices and availability of your gadgets eventually. We're kind of in this weird waiting period, it feels like.
And it's a very accurate way to frame it. The global tech supply chain is so interconnected. Tariffs on essential components, like semiconductors, they almost inevitably ripple outwards and can eventually show up in consumer prices. So yeah, immediate impact might be avoided, but it's definitely a situation to keep watching.
Okay, so here's something to chew on. Given all this back and forth, the tough talk, the specific carve-outs, the potential pivot to critical components like semiconductors and this whole national security angle, What does this all signal for the long run? Like, where are our phones and computers actually going to be made in the future? Is this just a blip, a temporary pause in trade tensions, or are we seeing the early signs of a much bigger shift in how global technology gets designed, manufactured, and sold? Seems like the story is far from over.